While Kevin Durant may perhaps be the most polarizing player off the court, Russell Westbrook is perhaps the most polarizing player on the court. He is unique in many different ways, some positive, some negative. He'll do things on a basketball court that no other human being can do, make plays that few would even think to attempt. But on the other hand, he also commits mistakes at an alarming frequency. Sure, with any player you can point to areas in their game where they could use some improvement. But with Westbrook, his weaknesses at times seem just as glaring as his strengths. Above all else, there is one area of Westbrook's game that he can definitely work on. It is something that is not only practical, but also something realistically fixable. It is also what I believe to be the only way Westbrook can be an effective player alongside Carmelo Anthony and Paul George, and thus the only hope for the Oklahoma City Thunder to hoist up the Larry O'Brien Trophy come June. What's up guys, my name is Mark. Let's take it back to 2010. LeBron joins forces with Chris Bosh and Dwayne Wade in Miami. They end up winning the championship twice. How did they do it? You can point to LeBron elevating his game to new heights. You can point to the many great role players Miami had. But I would argue that the most important factor was the sacrifices both Wade and Bosh had to make. Now for Bosh, the sacrifice was giving up his touches in the post, becoming an elite spot-up shooter, eventually extending his range to the three-point line, and becoming one of the best defenders in the league. For Wade, it was recognizing that LeBron was the better overall player, and that he should have the ball in his hands more often than Wade did. Yes, Wade can take over the offense for LeBron when LeBron sits, but the two of them and Chris Bosh still have to figure out how to play together, especially because they were going to have to play together during crunch time. Now, throughout his entire career and even his entire prime, there was always one big weakness in Dwayne Wade's game, possibly the only weakness in his game. He was an awful three-point shooter, in fact much worse than even Westbrook. He never attempted many, but when he did, he shot them at a shockingly low rate. So on offense, if Wade wasn't going to space the floor for LeBron, how was he going to fit in? Well, it took some time for them to figure it out, but eventually Wade learned that when LeBron had the ball, he could still get his points and be an effective player by being an off-ball cutter. Of course, there are major differences between the Miami Heat Big Three and the OKC Big Three. They're all different players with different skill sets at different stages in their career. But the macro principle remains the same. When you bring together multiple superstars who are used to having the ball, the most important thing is for them to figure out how to play without the ball. Magic Johnson, James Worthy, and Kareem were able to play together largely because Magic was an unselfish player who didn't care about how many points he scored, and his playstyle thrived on making others better. When the Chicago Bulls added Dennis Rodman to their roster, there was already a defined hierarchy, and Rodman knew what his job was. It was rebounding and playing defense, neither of which conflicted with MJ or Pippen having the ball on offense. When the Celtics brought together Paul Pierce, Ray Allen, and Kevin Garnett, they quickly figured out how to make it work as well. Ray Allen took a step back offensively, realizing that he had to give up having the ball in his hands to Pierce and Rondo. His points per game went from 26 to 17, but it was an adjustment he was willing to make for the greater good of the team. Garnett also realized that he wouldn't get the ball in the post as much, and he had to cut out a large portion of his one-on-one opportunities, and instead focus on making the Celtics the best defensive team in the league, which he did. It took Kyrie, LeBron, and Kevin Love some time to figure it out, but they did as well. So let's bring this back to OKC. Their rough offensive start has been mitigated by their extraordinary defense, largely attributed to the addition of Paul George, who is just an absolute monster on the defensive end, both off the ball and on the ball. In that sense, Paul George reminds me a bit of the roles Kevin Garnett and Chris Bosh played on their respective teams. But still, if this team wants a legit chance at beating Golden State, Houston, or even San Antonio in the playoffs, they're not going to do it with a below-average offense. Now, out of the OKC Big Three, Paul George, to me, has done the best job adjusting. He's 100% locked in defensively, like we talked about, and on offense, he's learned to play without the ball, attempting a career-high 43% of his shots from three, most of them spot-up threes, which he's hitting at a 40% clip. Carmelo Anthony is still occasionally taking some of the typical Melo isolation shots, but he hasn't had the ball nearly as much as he did last season. The concern with him, from my perspective, is more so that too many games he's just not hitting his spot-up shots, which I do think can be mostly attributed to simply an extended shooting slump. Melo's catch-and-shoot percentages when he was in Denver and New York simply weren't nearly as bad. But maybe there is a reason why Melo isn't doing as well on his catch-and-shoot shots. And that brings us to Russell Westbrook. When you watch OKC's offense, the thing that stands out is their stagnation and poor execution. Now, it's easy for us fans to look at this and blame it all on Billy Donovan. And I'm not saying Donovan is without blame, but Donovan isn't the biggest reason why the Thunder offense lacks ball movement and generates inconsistent and horrible shots. If we were to divide up the blame pie, Westbrook deserves the biggest slice. Now, I'm not even going to talk about Westbrook's poor shooting efficiency. I'm not even going to talk about the blatant cases of Westbrook ignoring a drawn-up play and doing his own thing. What I am going to talk about is Westbrook's lack of off-ball movement. Next time you watch OKC games, pay attention and ask yourself, what is Westbrook doing when he doesn't have the ball? The answer is nothing. Westbrook does nothing when he doesn't have the ball. He doesn't screen for his teammates like you see Chris Paul doing. He doesn't sprint across the baseline like you see Steph doing. He doesn't know how to effectively cut backdoor when his defenders deny him the ball, which is something Kyrie mastered over the years. No. Westbrook either stands in a corner with his hands on his knees, or he stands at the top of the three-point line waiting for the ball to come back to him. He's not that great of a three-point shooter, so obviously you can't run Westbrook off the ball the same way you would run a Steph Curry off the ball. But that's not an excuse to stop Westbrook from becoming a great off-ball cutter. Like we talked about previously, Wade was an even worse three-point shooter than Russ, but that didn't stop Wade from working his magic off the ball. Now, one could argue that Wade was playing alongside one of the greatest passers of all time in LeBron James, who was able to find him on those cuts, but that's missing the point. The Thunder aren't finding Westbrook cutting to the rim because Westbrook doesn't even attempt cutting to the rim. And even if, let's say that the Thunder players are so dumb and incompetent that they can't toss a proper backdoor pass, Westbrook cutting off the ball would still do wonders for the Thunder's stagnant offense. It would at least force his defender to work harder. Athletically speaking, Westbrook has no excuse. The biggest athletic component to off-ball cutting is lateral quickness, which is partially what makes Avery Bradley such a great off-ball cutter. And in Westbrook's case, being the freak athlete that he is, there's no excuse for him being not athletic enough. And even if he wasn't athletic enough, off-ball cutting has to do with basketball IQ much more so than athleticism. The problem with Westbrook, therefore, lies in here. His biggest flaws have always been in here. It was never anything to do with his tangibles, not even his below average efficiency as a jump shooter, because he's not the only one. It was always his decision making, his stubbornness, how he often gets tunnel vision, abandons plays midway through, frequently misses open teammates, commits unnecessary turnovers, and forces himself into impossible shots that he simply isn't skilled enough to make. I know that sounds harsh, but it's only harsh because Westbrook is so immensely talented. And if he is the superstar that everyone claims him to be, if he is the MVP that everyone voted him to be, those are the standards that he will be held against. You know, I've said this on my podcast, but I'll say it here again. I love Westbrook as a personality off the court. He's loyal, he likes to have fun, his fashion is fearless, he's a good role model from what I can tell, and I have never questioned Westbrook's desire to win, nor have I ever questioned his effort. But what I am questioning is his ability to make smart basketball decisions and his ability to step outside of his comfort zone. Having the ball in his hands feels natural to Westbrook. Going full speed at all times feels natural to Westbrook. And when crunch time comes, when the clock is ticking down, when the pressure is on, Westbrook, like every other player, defaults to what feels natural to them. For Westbrook, that means trying to do every single thing by himself. And this idea of doing everything by yourself has been a bit glorified in basketball as having a quote-unquote killer instinct or a quote-unquote Mamba mentality. Now, Michael Jordan and Kobe Bryant are two players that personified this playstyle, and it did wonders for their careers. The problem is, Westbrook ain't Jordan. Westbrook ain't Kobe. He's not the same type of shot creator and scorer that those guys were, and he is definitely not the isolation player that those guys were. And even if he were, he still has to learn how to trust his teammates the same way MJ and Kobe had to learn how to trust their teammates. The key to OKC winning the championship lies upon their best player, Russell Westbrook. For Westbrook, not to do what feels right to him, but to do what is actually right for the team's success. My name is Mark, aka MDJ, and I'll see you next video.